Welcome to the Awaken on Purpose podcast, where each week you'll receive insight, inspiration, and advice for aligning your mind, body, and spirit to achieve a fulfilled life and live your purpose with me, your host, Jennifer Spohr. You'll also hear from other leaders who share their inspirational stories and wisdom in living fulfilled, on purpose, and making an impact. If you're a mission-driven leader and you're passionate about learning and integrating all the things that empower you to live and lead a fulfilled, purpose-led life, this is the show for you. Hey everyone, I'm really excited to welcome as a guest to the show today, Brandt Passalacqua. He is the creator of Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy. He has been enjoying yoga and the healing arts since 2001 after overcoming obesity and a life-threatening autoimmune illness. His personal journey serves as an inspiration to countless others and informs his compassionate, humorous, and down-to-earth teaching style. Welcome. I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We've already been having fun even before we hit record today.
Yes, it's going well. We haven't even started, so
yes, I
this
love
should be
it.
good.
Well, it's going to be awesome. So, I'd love to hear more about the work that you're doing, but more about also what inspired you to actually choose to do it.
Sure. So, I think my story is, we all have a unique story, but I think in terms of yoga therapists, there's this common thread of something horrible happens to you, and then you learn about how yoga can help you, and then you decide to help others. So, I mean, I've heard this story a million times in different ways, but my story is I was around 30, I'd been a musician, I smoked 4 packs a day, had never heard of yoga, drank a lot, etc. And I was actually working on my house, and I woke up the next day and I was basically dying. I got an autoimmune disease. I didn't know what it was. And I ended up in a intensive care unit. I was living in New York. It was actually September 10th, 2001. So it was like right before 9/11. Not when I went in, but when I got out. So I was in, and then I got out of the hospital and woke up to 9/11. So it was like a strange time. And I was very grateful not to be in the hospital anymore. But I was really sick. I couldn't walk well. I couldn't really sit up. I had a blood disease. So I wasn't able to like stand up without being dizzy, etc. And the prognosis wasn't great. A lot of people with my condition had organs removed. I was on this was a long time ago, I was on this Yahoo group, sort of with other people from around the world with this condition. They're like, oh, I went blind, or, so I decided to get off the Yahoo group because, it wasn't inspiring.
Right.
So long story shortish, I learned this practice. I began to rehab. And then I had never done any yoga, so I learned a little bit. And one of the practices I learned was Yoga Nidra, which is basically a meditational practice where you're lying down, which suited me, and it's guided. And I did that, and I got really, really good at it. And I did it on and off all day for months because I didn't have a lot else to do. And that practice really, really, really helped me, and I got a lot better. And then through my experience of trying to rehab myself, I started going to yoga classes, and that really helped me. And so I had this sort of kind of miraculous healing over time of my autoimmune disease. And then in addition, I had been obese, and I lost a lot of weight. And probably more importantly is I was losing weight, and I was like keeping it off. It wasn't really a struggle. Like it had been. And so after all that, I got really into yoga, and I became a yoga teacher. And I started working with overweight and obese people, and then some eating disorders, and I got really interested. I took a yoga therapy training, and I got really into that piece of the work, the therapeutic aspects of yoga. And I didn't know then, but it was sort of, it had been around a while, but it was kind of the beginning of what we see now in terms of yoga therapy. There was like yoga had gotten popular and yoga therapy was sort of like right behind it. So I was in one of the first 2 yoga therapy trainings in the US with my teacher. And, time went on, I started working with people and I was just like really inspired. Like I started using some of the methods I had used and then some yoga therapy methods to work with people who are obese. And of course, people who are obese have all the same issues that everyone else has. So some of them are sick, some of them have physical conditions, some of them have autoimmune diseases. And so I was seeing just all these like incredible results. So anyway, that's how I got here. And, now I have a school and teach other people. So
I love it. So we were talking a little bit before we started recording our interview, and I was saying, I haven't seen a whole lot out there on yoga therapy until we connected to do this interview. I'd love to hear more about how yoga therapy is different from other healing modalities.
Sure. I think there's many ways it's different and the same. So there's all these ways we can help ourselves, be healthier. Yoga therapy specifically applying yoga practices, which is the movement piece. It's called asana, but most people think of yoga as the movement part. The breathing techniques and meditational techniques and applying them for health outcomes. So it's basically doing yoga, but specifically for what's wrong with you. And now, this has been going on for years and years now, but now there's like more momentum. So there's a lot more research on this. So what we're seeing is that, these techniques work. And I think what makes them unique is it's something you learn to do to heal or maintain your own health. So unlike, some other alternative modalities, like going to an acupuncturist, right? Like you need the acupuncturist. But what we do is if like you came to a yoga therapist, you say, oh, I have lupus and I don't like how I feel because I'm sick. And what do you got for me? We kind of put together a package of practices and work with you individually till we find like the perfect mix that would like reduce your symptoms. And so we do that from everything from, torn rotator cuffs and scoliosis to, things like autoimmune diseases, asthma, chronic conditions like that. And then also like where I think yoga therapy is getting the most movement right now is in the mental health realm. So anxiety, depression, trauma. The VA has been using yoga therapists to work with PTSD. The Army has done stuff. So there's like a lot of movement there. And we're seeing a lot of mental health professionals also like integrate what we found as yoga therapists into their practices. So in our school, for instance, we train a lot of therapists. And so they become yoga therapists also, and they combine the 2 modalities.
I'm finding this super fascinating. So I have lots of questions from what you're saying. One is, my first question is, so I'm hearing you talk a lot about mental health and, respiratory conditions and soft tissue conditions, i.e., the torn rotator cuff. What about someone who actually has like a bone issue, like a broken bone that they're healing from, or?
Yeah, not so much. So we're like, our thing is subacute, as they say. So, you wouldn't go to a yoga therapist instead of a doctor. That would be like really ill-advised. What's happening now is like we're getting brought into it's what's called now complementary care. So you'll see yoga therapists working with a team, right? So you go to your doctor. This is a typical trajectory, but it's not everywhere. Insurance doesn't cover us except in certain circumstances. So that's why you don't just walk into your doctor and they're like, hey, here's Brandt, he's a yoga therapist. But what we see, what I see in my practice in my school and our practicum is typical scenario is, you hurt your shoulder, you go to the doctor, they evaluate you, they give you an MRI, you get your diagnosis. And now you got a couple of options. You have surgery, which may or may not help. And, the surgeon tells you that, probably help, here are the risks. And then you have yoga therapy and it'll probably help. And here are the risks. So it's like another option. So in my world, of course, I'm going to tell you to do some exercises and like certain things to heal your shoulder. You know, from my perspective, you're crazy not to do the yoga therapy first, right? Like before you get a shoulder surgery and have scar tissue forming in your shoulder and you can't move your shoulder for months.
I agree totally. I've actually had a torn rotator
right. So
surgery on it.
You'd be amazed. Some of our techniques like work really, really, really well. And like everything, you know, I'm not going to say, oh, everybody I've ever worked with a rotator cuff injury got better. That's not true for anyone. But what I have seen is like we have specific techniques where people can kind of reset how the muscles fire in their shoulder so they're not in pain. And some people do it once and they're good for like months. Some people do it like every day, you know, and that helps. But we have these kinds of techniques where, again, you can like help yourself, right? So you can choose to do that.
Yeah.
And then for like not physical, you know, for things that aren't physical, it's probably even more relevant, right? Because if you have an anxiety disorder, you have therapy, you have drugs. In my world, you have therapy, you have drugs, and you have us, you know, we have what we can teach you. So, you know, I've had an anxiety disorder and I've done a lot of yoga and now I don't. So I'm a huge proponent and I don't have to take.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of, I mean, I'm a coach, but also a healer too. I mean, you know, I'm a Reiki practitioner. I work in light body and I also work in the Akashic records. I'm all about going that route, you know, prior to the drugs.
Yeah. And so you would understand, like we work in what we call the pranic body, right? So we teach you how to affect your own energetic body.
Yep.
And we have a lot of techniques to do that. And we have frameworks where we would assess you and be able to figure out, hopefully fairly quickly, which ones are going to be most appropriate for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the results, I mean, in my own journey and also in my experience working with clients, a lot of the results that someone experiences or that they don't experience is directly connected to their mindset around their condition, right? I also believe that there is a deeper meaning and connection behind every physical condition that we experience as well.
Well, I definitely think that, and what I love, I mean, this is how I process information. You know, neuroscience is catching up, you know, with all of this. So if you're paying attention, you know, to not what they're using, but what they're talking about in neuroscience, you're starting to see it all come together. And so we already know, right, that the way you perceive pain is a mind thing, right? So, you know, you can change your mind and change how much pain you're experiencing. And then the only real question there is how. So I think most people don't really think of it that way, right? They're like, I'm in pain. It has a source. And that source, whatever, is my shoulder. And that's sort of true, but not really.
Well, it goes
you know, because your mind has to process it.
Yeah, it goes back to that. So many of us have that societal conditioning or imprinting around being taught that we have to look outside of ourselves for solutions to our problems. And there is definitely a time and place for medication, for yoga therapy, for coaching support, or any other type of support that someone needs. But the healing, I believe, is the purpose of supporting someone in that capacity is not just to heal them, right? But to also work with them to get to a place where they've taken their power back, where they feel empowered.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's why I use that word agency, because it's really the word, I think, when people are thinking about their own paths to healing. You know, we can't work with everyone as yoga therapists because not everybody is interested even in having like that sort of power over their own outcome. And or at least power to influence the outcome. And, we only work with people, and it's one of the great things about my job, because when I see clients, all of them want to get better.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that to like judge anyone. And I think, there's a lot of situations where it's hard to find that within yourself. And of course, we always try to help people do that. But in the end, you have to want it a little bit. And, when you do, there's a lot you can do. And I had that personal experience. I mean, it completely changed the trajectory of my life, when I realized, oh, a doctor told me I was really sick, I would probably have this outcome. And I said to myself, well, I don't want that outcome. I'm not just going to accept that. I'm going to see what I can do. And, as I'm sure often the process to healing in that way is a combination of practices and effort and a lot of softening and acceptance, and that
surrender. Yes.
Yeah. It's essential.
Yeah.
And to teach someone that can be difficult, because it's not where we go to first. Like you said, you're not programmed for that.
Yeah. Different actions, different results. I mean, very simply, that's what it comes down to. I often share with people, for my own journey of how powerful, just even starting to do meditation years ago. I mean, because I've been on this path for a long time at this point, but years ago, I was just in this really kind of high level corporate leadership position. I was just on all the time and stressed all the time and really high strung. And so I used to be on 2 medications for anxiety. And when I started doing meditation as a regular practice, after just a few months, I was able to walk away from them completely. And wow. I am not a medical doctor, so I have to include that disclaimer here, just to say.
Me either.
But I'm so passionate about it because we are so powerful in terms of being able to heal ourselves, but we have to have the willingness to go within, right? And then reach out to people such as yourself, for support to kind of, bring us fully around the corner, so to speak.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily know what to do. I mean, it's a good
right.
point. Like somebody has to teach you, and having this sort of come into the light. So you're asking about yoga therapy. You said I hadn't heard of it. It's like, as I'm watching it, over the last 20 years from when I started, now it's like a thing.
Yeah.
And you've got like the National Institutes of Health, you've got doctors, you've got all these people looking at it and going, oh, well, that actually worked. Like, it's a beautiful thing because the messaging it hasn't changed, but it is changing.
Yeah.
It's like, I saw this study that the National Institute of Health or whatever they call it in England did for their health system. And they took a bunch of people who were like mild to moderately depressed. And they had them, half of them like do drugs and half of them they assigned exercise and therapy. And the exercise and therapy was so much better than the drug outcome.
Yeah.
That they just integrated into their health system. And you could see that, that evolution. So the next part of that evolution is like yoga therapy. It's like what happens if you take, and we have those studies, you take a bunch of depressed people, you put them in a certain type of yoga class 3 times a week for 8 weeks, and they're less depressed.
The body, like I said, there is a time and place for medication, but the body has such a powerful internal system that's already there, for healing, right? Like exercise is so great because, I mean, there are all the obvious benefits, but it helps to calm your nervous system and it boosts relaxation and creativity. And I mean, yeah, there are just endless benefits. I really could go down a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I talk about all day, but it's like the breath, one of the things that's like a key component in yoga is breathing. And the outcomes and the science from that are so obvious, but it's just like nobody's been really taught this yet, that if you breathe properly, your nervous system, your immune system, like all these things that control your health outcomes and mood states will change. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things we teach.
I love that. So I have a, kind of a big question I want to get your thoughts on, because I know what I believe about it, and is that I really believe that all of the conflict in the world stems from the illusion of separation. And defining separation as, whenever we're feeling fear or illness or anything like that, anything other than truth and love, we're essentially disconnected from our source. So I feel like even, like if everyone in the world did meditation or, had some kind of mindfulness practices, we'd be in a much better place right now. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I started a meditation school. And,
right. So you're on board.
You don't do things like work really hard at meditation schools for the large cash reward. You know what I mean? It's because you believe in something. And yeah. I couldn't agree more. People don't do horrible things to other people when they see them as themselves or similar to themselves, however you want to put it. There's another part of it, which is, in yoga, we have this concept of samskaras, but it's basically impressions from your past. And in yoga, it's from past lives or this life. It doesn't really matter. One of the ways you could think about it is our whole kind of point being around is to work through these things. And that's where if you did, you would be enlightened according to yoga, and then you'd die and you'd be done with all these lives. That's the general trajectory. And whether you believe it or not, it's a great concept, because, if you live every day saying, okay, well, it's my job to see everything about myself and understand it, I'd be a better person. And so to your point about conflict, when people can't see their own fears and traumas and what's really actually influencing their actions, they can't act differently. And so it's made me understand the world. I mean, on a personal note, I get less frustrated seeing people do horrible things. And it's more a reminder to me that they haven't been taught basically how to do this. They haven't had the experience of seeing their own fear. They're in a different what's place. Driving them.
Yep. They're in a different place on their journey. And when you understand that, you're able to, really step away from judgment. As humans, we like to make things more complicated than they need to be a lot of times. And it really is simple.
Simple and I think the complicated part comes when, you're trying to figure out, and this is a passion of mine, how do I do this? How do I meditate? How do I do yoga for my health? Whatever it is, in the context of my life, which is maybe I have 3 kids, I have a job, I'm taking care of my elderly parents, all the things we do, right? So that's really the question. It's like, how can you apply practices? So one of the things, that I work really hard on is developing and teaching yoga therapy practices and meditation practices that are really efficient and can be done by, what someone might call regular people. Because a lot of the traditions, they're great in yoga, but a lot of them come from these renunciate traditions where people are, living in an ashram and, they've got 6.5 days to practice their craft. And then they say, this is such an amazing practice. Right. And so one of the things we're trying to do is sort of bring it, to regular people. It's like, you can actually really influence your health and really influence your quality of life without spending hours a day thinking about it. So I like that message to get out there.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we're having this conversation. It's very synchronistic because I'm actually creating a new mastermind now that focuses around embodiment. And that's really where I find a lot of people struggle, right? Is they can even have the desire to implement what you're talking about into their daily life, but they look at, how do I get from here, to there with everything that you're talking about? And in my experience, I found it's several components, right? Like it's a combination of things that get you to that place. You know, there has to be a desire, there has to be a willingness to take different actions. You know, it could be a time management thing, it could be, you know, a mindset thing. I mean, I feel like there's just a little bit of all of that that goes into successfully embodying, you know, kind of what and who we want to be.
Yeah, and also as you practice, it gets easier because you see things a little more clearly, right? So I think a lot of the work is on the front end. You know, they I always like those workplace studies where they find out that everyone does 3 hours a day of work in their 8-hour days, the average employee, you know, and the rest of the time is spent thinking about other things and going to the water cooler or whatever, you know. And this pandemic has actually shown that, right? Everybody went home and worked, and people are just fine at home and they get to do their laundry. So I think it's the same with what we do, where, you know, once you get a little momentum with your practice and can see things more clearly, there's actually a lot more space for you to do it.
For sure.
So it's great you're doing that mastermind. We've done programs, you know, in our weight loss program. A huge component of it is time management and sort of like, you know, getting your bleep together, you know, so that you can be more healthy and happy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm loving this conversation. So in closing, is there anything else that you're feeling guided to bring forward?
Well, I think, I think what the only other thing I'd like to say is that I really do want everyone that's listening to this to understand that there are other avenues in terms of increasing your health, and they are not they don't have to be super esoteric. Just because the roots of the practices are like older or from another place, it doesn't mean that if you were actually participating in the process, it wouldn't make sense to you. So for some people, that's not a barrier, but I know for a lot of people, they're like, what is this like? It's a little weird, maybe, right? To go to a yoga therapist, what would happen to me? Or I can't do yoga, all those things. But when we work with, you know, I work with everyone from like monks who live on ashrams to like truck drivers who drive to me because they have sciatica, and I've never really had a problem. And, you know, it's actually such a joy to work with people who who haven't really kind of looked at this before. I actually find them easier to work with in some ways because they have no preconceived notions. So it's lovely. The only last thing I'd share is, you know, if you need help, I would definitely encourage people to look at yoga therapy as just like one of the options. I think it's very safe. It's a low buy-in. There's so much there for you. And, you know, I've spent the last 10 years with my school running around trying to promote those things. So thank you for letting me do that today.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And for those listeners who want to get in touch with you, we'll be sure to include all of your information in the show notes as well.
Great. Thanks. And, we're really easy to find, breathingdeeply.com. We have that good domain name, so you can't forget it.
Yeah, awesome. And I would just say, if someone's feeling drawn to connect with you, drawn to this kind of, you know, work, to not question it, but listen to that feeling, you know, right? And just be willing to trust it and follow it.
Yeah, and know that you know, at least myself and all the people I've trained, which is hundreds and hundreds now that we can help you find, you know, they're all in service of you. So, you know, a yoga therapist is there for you and not themselves. So it's a very safe place to be.
Brandt, thank you so much for just this really amazing conversation today. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for helping bring this work to the world. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Awaken on Purpose podcast.
Please visit me and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or at awakeandonpurpose.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how you can achieve a fulfilled life, live your purpose, and make an impact as a mission-driven leader, visit me at jenniferspore.com.